Across different continents and decades, a camera shutter froze moments that were never meant to be final. Smiles lingered, journeys paused, and ordinary days quietly unfolded, unaware they would become last known records. What happened after these images were taken remains uncertain, unresolved, and deeply haunting. Let's uncover 5 last photos taken before they vanished without a trace. Story 1. In November 1961, along the remote southern coast of what was then Dutch New Guinea, dense jungle met restless seas in a landscape few outsiders truly understood. It was here, far from established shipping routes and modern infrastructure, that a young American explorer set out on what would become his final journey, one that ended without witnesses, certainty, or resolution. Michael Clark Rockefeller was born on May 18, 1938, in New York City. He was the youngest son of Nelson Rockefeller, a prominent public figure, and Mary Todd Hunter Clark. Raised in a family deeply involved in art, philanthropy, and global affairs, Michael developed a strong interest in culture and history from an early age. He studied history and economics at Harvard University, where his curiosity increasingly turned toward anthropology and indigenous art. Friends described him as thoughtful, disciplined, and quietly adventurous. Rather than seeking notoriety, Michael was motivated by learning. By his early 20s, he had traveled extensively and became particularly drawn to the Asmat people of New Guinea, whose artistic traditions were largely undocumented in Western institutions. In November 1961, Michael traveled to the region to collect Asmat artifacts for a planned museum exhibition. He was accompanied by Dutch anthropologist René Wassing and several local guides. During this period, a series of photographs was taken documenting Michael's work. One image, now considered the last known photograph of him, shows Michael seated among Asmat men, carefully examining an object in his hands. He appears calm and focused, engaged in study rather than conversation. There is no visible tension in the scene, only concentration and quiet purpose. Shortly after, on November 17th, the expedition's small catamaran became overloaded and capsized in rough coastal waters approximately 2 miles from shore. Michael and Wassing clung to the overturned vessel for hours. Believing land was reachable, Michael tied 2 empty gasoline cans to his waist for flotation and entered the water, telling Wassing he would seek help. It was the last confirmed sighting of Michael Rockefeller. Rescue efforts began almost immediately. Dutch colonial authorities launched air and sea searches, and local boats patrolled the coastline. René Wassing was rescued the following day, still clinging to the capsized craft. Michael was not found. Authorities initially concluded that he likely drowned due to exhaustion or strong currents. In later years, alternative theories emerged, suggesting Michael may have reached shore. Some accounts referenced local, oral histories, but no physical evidence has ever confirmed survival, contact, or foul play. Investigators and officials have consistently stated that no definitive proof supports any explanation beyond the fact that Michael entered the water and never returned. For the Rockefeller family, Michael's disappearance became a deeply personal loss, lived under international attention. Searches continued for weeks, followed by years of quiet inquiry. His parents supported further anthropological research in the region, but ultimately accepted the absence of certainty. The last photograph of Michael, calm, observant, and immersed in his work, has since become a lasting reminder of his final days. It reflects not how his journey ended, but how he chose to spend it, learning, documenting, and engaging with a world far from his own. What if Michael Rockefeller reached the shore, believing help was close, only to face circumstances no one could later confirm? And what if the final photograph captures not a moment before tragedy, but the life he was always meant to pursue? Story 2. On a cold July night in Australia's Northern Territory, the vast emptiness of the Stuart Highway stretched endlessly under the stars. It was a road known for long distances and sparse traffic, a place where travelers often relied on one another. For a young couple journeying north, that isolation would become the backdrop for a disappearance that still echoes across the Australian outback. Peter Marco Falconio was born on September 20th, 1972, in Yorkshire, England. Friends and family described him as relaxed, adventurous, and open-hearted. He enjoyed meeting new people and was drawn to travel as a way of experiencing life beyond routine. In 2000, Peter and his girlfriend, Joanne Lees, began an extended backpacking trip across Australia, working temporary jobs and documenting their journey with photographs. The pair embraced a carefree, nomadic lifestyle, often traveling long distances through remote regions without concern. On Saturday evening, July 14, 2001, at around 7:30 p.m., Peter and Joanne were driving their orange Volkswagen Combi north along the Stuart Highway, heading toward the Devil's Marbles. Peter was behind the wheel, with Joanne seated beside him. Earlier, after stopping at the Barrow Creek Roadhouse, they noticed a vehicle following them, a white Toyota four-wheel drive with a green canopy. Expecting it to pass, they were instead signaled to pull over. The driver gestured urgently, indicating there was a problem with their van. Peter stopped and walked ahead to speak with the man, who claimed he had seen sparks coming from the exhaust. As they moved to the rear of the van to check, Joanne slid into the driver's seat, preparing to rev the engine. Moments later, she heard a loud bang. The man suddenly appeared at her window, holding a handgun, and entered the van. Joanne was restrained with cable ties, but during a moment of distraction, she escaped into the surrounding bush. Peter Falconio was never seen again. Earlier that day, a photograph had been taken inside the van, one that would later become deeply significant. In the image, Peter is smiling casually from the driver's seat, relaxed and unaware that it would be the final known photograph taken before he vanished. Police launched a large-scale investigation across the Northern Territory. Physical evidence recovered from the scene supported the conclusion that a violent crime had occurred. Extensive searches were conducted across remote desert terrain. In 2005, Bradley John Murdoch was convicted of Peter Falconio's murder, despite Peter's body never being recovered. Authorities stated that the lack of remains did not undermine the evidence presented in court. Over the years, further searches have continued intermittently, but no confirmed location of Peter's remains has been found. Officials have maintained that while legal responsibility was established, unanswered questions remain. For Peter's family, the absence of his remains has made grief an ongoing process rather than a moment of closure. His parents have spoken about the difficulty of mourning without certainty or a final resting place. The photograph taken inside the van, capturing Peter in a moment of ease, has become a lasting reminder of his life before the outback claimed him. For those who loved him, it preserves not the violence of that night, but the person he was. What if Peter and Joanne had chosen not to stop on that isolated stretch of highway? And what if the final photograph captures the last ordinary moment before the journey changed forever? Story 3. On a calm autumn night in Okinawa, Japan, a single photograph captured a smiling woman at a formal gathering on a U.S. military base. Within hours, she would disappear, leaving behind a car parked near seaside cliffs, a series of unanswered timelines, and a mystery that remains unresolved years later. Kelli Cribbs. Abad grew up in Brooklet, Georgia, a small rural town outside Savannah where she lived with her parents and brother. Raised in a close-knit family, Kelli enjoyed working on the farm and fishing, and she developed a reputation for being outgoing and compassionate. Her mother, Janice Cribbs, described her as someone who was always helpful, with a natural concern for children and the elderly. Kelli's half-sister, Jennifer Lisa Schumann, recalled that despite their age difference, they were close and spoke regularly. Guided by her caring nature, Kelli pursued work as a nursing and medical assistant. While living in Georgia, she met Vince Abad, a United States Air Force airman. The couple married in 2006 and later had 2 children. Military life took them to several duty stations before Vince was assigned to Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan, where the family relocated. On October 26, 2007, Kelli spent the day with her children, picking them up from school and playing with them at home. That evening, she took them to a 7 p.m. church service off base. Vince attended the same service but arrived separately. Around 8:45 p.m., Kelli returned home with the children and put them to bed. According to later accounts, Vince returned home around 10 p.m. and said Kelli was not there. Her car was also missing. Base records later indicated that Kelli entered Kadena Air Force Base at approximately 8:37 p.m. and exited around 9:11 p.m. Around that time, her phone was turned off and never reactivated. When Kelli did not make contact later that night, she was reported missing to military officials and local Japanese authorities. Earlier that evening, a photograph had been taken of Kelli at an airman's ball. In the image, she is seated at a table, smiling openly at the camera. She appears relaxed, well-dressed, and at ease. There is no visible sign of distress. The photograph would become the last known image of Kelli Cribbs Abad before she vanished. On October 29th, Kelli's car was found near the cliffs at Cape Zampa. Inside were her keys, phone, identification, and wedding ring. Investigators also reported finding a handwritten note expressing love for her children, husband, and parents. Authorities have not publicly confirmed when or under what circumstances the note was written. Some investigators explored the possibility of self-harm, while Kelli's family strongly rejected that interpretation, stating she had future plans and had recently spoken positively about an upcoming relocation to Germany or Alaska. The U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations and Okinawa Police reviewed base records, interviewed witnesses, and conducted searches. Officials have stated that the case remains an open and active missing persons investigation, with no definitive conclusion confirmed. Kelli's disappearance left her family in prolonged uncertainty. Her mother traveled to Japan weeks later, distributing flyers and speaking with authorities and neighbors. Over the years, journalists and independent researchers have attempted to gather information, though access to official details has remained limited. Kelli's children continue to grow up without clear answers, while her family remains committed to keeping her story visible and seeking clarity. What if the last photograph captured not an ending, but the final ordinary moment before everything changed? And what if the truth of Kelli Cribbs Abad's disappearance remains hidden within timelines that have yet to be fully understood? Story 4. In mid-May 2006, deep within the forests of northwestern Ontario, a routine workday ended with a man walking away from a tree planting site and into the wilderness. It was not dramatic, loud, or witnessed by many, but it was final. What followed was a search through dense woods, unanswered timelines, and a disappearance that remains unresolved years later. Aju Iroaga was 26 years old and hailed from southern Ontario. He was described by colleagues as experienced, capable, and familiar with the physical demands of remote forestry work. Aju worked as a tree planter for A&M Reforestation, a Sudbury-based company, a job that required endurance, independence, and long days in isolated terrain. Tree planting camps were not unfamiliar to him, and coworkers indicated he understood both the risks and routines of working far from towns and roadways. There was no indication that Aju was inexperienced, reckless, or unfamiliar with bush travel. He had built a reputation as someone who could handle difficult conditions and long stretches away from urban life. On Monday, May 15, 2006, Aju was working at a planting site approximately 70 kilometers north of White River, Ontario. Sometime during the afternoon, a disagreement reportedly occurred between Aju and his site supervisor. According to company officials, Aju decided to quit his job that day. Rather than waiting for the scheduled crew transport back to town, he chose to walk out of the forest on his own. He was last seen around 4:30 p.m., heading away from the work site and into the surrounding woods. Co-workers later searched nearby paths and areas where he might have traveled, but they were unable to locate him. When Aju did not emerge or make contact, authorities were notified. Earlier that same day, a photograph had been taken at the work site. In the image, Aju is seated near a campfire, wearing work gloves and outdoor clothing. He appears calm, resting between tasks with no visible signs of distress. The photograph would later be identified as the last known image of Aju Iroaga before he walked into the forest and vanished. Ontario Provincial Police launched a search involving canine units and emergency response teams. The terrain proved challenging. Thick forest, uneven ground, and limited visibility complicated efforts. Police stated early on that foul play was not suspected. Company representatives confirmed that Aju was aware of standard safety procedures, including the policy to transport workers to town if they chose to leave employment. Officials noted that if he had waited another hour and a half, a scheduled ride would have taken him to White River, where access to phones, lodging, and transportation was available. Investigators considered the possibility that Aju became disoriented, injured, or encountered environmental hazards. Despite extensive searches, no physical evidence has been found to confirm what happened after he entered the woods. For Aju's family and those who knew him, the absence of answers has been lasting. The image of him resting by the fire, quiet, composed, and still among others, stands in stark contrast to the silence that followed. With no confirmed sightings and no recovered belongings beyond the work site, loved ones have been left with uncertainty rather than closure. Over time, the case has faded from public attention, but not from memory. What if Aju Iroaga believed the walk out of the forest would be brief and manageable? And what if the final photograph preserves the last ordinary moment before the wilderness erased his trail entirely? Story 5. In the late summer of 2001, 3 Czech students entered the rugged mountains of northern Albania, an area defined by steep terrain, sparse infrastructure, and limited records of travelers. What was meant to be a flexible journey through lesser-known regions of the Balkans quietly dissolved into uncertainty, leaving behind only fragments of movement, conflicting sightings, and a single photograph taken before they vanished without a trace. The missing students were brothers Michal Pavelka and Jan Pavelka and their close friend Lenka Tučková. Michal Pavelka was born on October 20th, 1977, making him 23 years old at the time of his disappearance. His younger brother, Jan Pavelka, was born on May 5th, 1979, and was 22 years old. Lenka Tučková, born on June 28, 1978, was also 23. All three were from the Czech Republic and knew each other through shared social circles and student activities. Friends described them as thoughtful, independent, and comfortable traveling without rigid plans. They preferred smaller towns over large cities and were drawn to nature and cultural exploration rather than conventional tourism. Lenka left Prague on August 5, 2001, traveling by bus to Budapest with her father. There, she was to meet Michal and Jan, who had traveled separately. Their tentative plan was to continue through the Balkans into Albania, explore the northern mountains, visit historical towns such as Gjirokastar and Kruja, and later return home via Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania. Official records later confirmed that the three students entered Albania on August 7th, crossing from Montenegro at the Hanai-Hotit border near Shkodra. No records indicate that they ever exited Albania through neighboring countries. Sometime during their travels, a photograph was taken showing Lenka, Michal, and Jan lying in the grass, relaxed and smiling. The image feels unguarded. Three young people resting during a journey, unaware that it would become the last known photograph of them together. After mid-August, contact with family ceased. Lenka was expected home by September 10th and the brothers by September 18th. None returned. Missing person reports were filed in mid to late September 2001. Albanian authorities, Czech officials, religious organizations, and volunteers became involved. Investigators reconstructed a rough route based on witness statements. Taxi drivers recalled transporting the group from Shkodra to Koplik and possibly toward the mountain villages of Boga and Theth, where the students reportedly planned to stay for several days. Multiple, unconfirmed sightings placed them deeper in the Albanian Alps, but none could be verified. Extensive searches were conducted in mountainous regions, caves, and villages, including Nikaj Chalet and surrounding areas. Reports that the students had been found alive later proved to be misidentifications. Authorities explored possibilities ranging from accidental injury in remote terrain to becoming lost, but no physical evidence has publicly confirmed any explanation. The case remains unresolved. For the families, the disappearance triggered months of searching and years of unanswered questions. Search expeditions traveled from the Czech Republic to Albania. Public appeals were made, and even senior political figures requested international cooperation. Lenka's parents and the Pavelka family continued to pursue leads long after official searches slowed. The final photograph, three friends resting together, has become central to remembrance, representing a moment of calm before uncertainty took over. With no remains and no confirmed final location, grief has existed without closure. What if the last photograph captured a simple pause in their journey rather than a moment before everything went wrong? And what if the answers to their disappearance remain hidden in terrain that never gave up its witnesses? Each photograph we've seen captured a life still in motion, plans unfinished, paths unchosen, futures unseen. These images do not explain what happened next, but they remind us of who was lost and why their stories still matter. Until answers emerge, these moments remain suspended in time, asking us to remember, to question, and to care. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.